The Abbotsford-Sumas border crossing was tense on a chilly March morning in 2025, the air thick with uncertainty. What was once a routine passage for thousands of trucks had become a scene of anxiety and anticipation, as both drivers and officials braced for what might come next. A long line of trucks, engines idling in the cold, stretched along the border. Canadian officials huddled together, their conversation unusually serious, casting worried glances at the growing queue. The usual banter and camaraderie among drivers was replaced by tense silence and nervous pacing. Dave, a veteran trucker hauling produce to Alaska, sensed something was off. This was no ordinary delay. He'd crossed this border hundreds of times, but today, the uncertainty in the air was unmistakable. He checked his paperwork again, hoping for answers that wouldn't come. News of tariffs and economic threats had been swirling for weeks, and now, the border felt like the front line of a new conflict. Headlines blared warnings of escalating trade disputes, and rumors spread quickly among the drivers, fueling anxiety. British Columbia's government had just introduced a bill to impose steep tolls on American trucks bound for Alaska, a direct response to U.S. trade threats. The move was bold, signaling that Canada was ready to push back, even if it meant disrupting a vital supply route. This wasn't just about money, it was a warning shot in a growing trade war. The border, once a symbol of cooperation, was now a stage for political maneuvering and economic brinkmanship. For Alaska, the route through BC is a lifeline, carrying perishable goods and critical supplies that can't wait for a slow sea journey. Every day, hundreds of trucks make this trek, ensuring that store shelves stay stocked and families have what they need. The prospect of new tolls sent shockwaves through Alaska's supply chain, threatening higher costs and delays. Logistics managers scrambled to find alternatives, but options were limited and expensive. The uncertainty rippled from warehouses to grocery stores and from businesses to families. Suddenly, the border was no longer a symbol of partnership, but a potential choke point. The flow of goods, once taken for granted, now hung in the balance, dependent on political decisions and international negotiations. The daily lives of hundreds of thousands of Alaskans now hinged on political decisions made far away. In living rooms and supermarkets, people watched the news anxiously, wondering how long the standoff would last and what it would mean for their communities. Goodwill between neighbors was evaporating, replaced by suspicion and brinkmanship. Decades of cooperation were being tested, as both sides dug in and prepared for a prolonged standoff. The trucks waited, caught in a conflict they never asked for, uncertain when or if they'd be allowed to move forward again. The crisis began in Washington, D.C., with President Trump reviving his hardline trade tactics. In March 2025, the administration threatened a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican imports, an economic sledgehammer, not a scalpel. Trump's America First rhetoric framed the move as protecting U.S. jobs, but the shockwaves hit both sides of the border. Prime Minister Trudeau called the tariffs a very dumb thing to do, warning they'd hurt both economies. Despite warnings, Trump signed an order delaying but not canceling the tariffs, keeping tensions high. Rumors of even more extreme threats like annexing Canada fueled Canadian distrust. Canadian leaders, feeling cornered, began preparing their own retaliatory measures. The Alaska-bound trucks in BC became the first target in a rapidly escalating standoff. British Columbia's Premier, David Eby, refused to stand by as Trump's tariffs loomed, threatening the province's economy and its vital trade routes. On March 6, 2025, Eby announced bold new legislation. British Columbia would have the authority to impose tolls on all trucks traveling to or from Alaska. This was a direct counterstrike, designed to send a clear message to Washington that BC would not be bullied. The Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act gave BC the power to act swiftly, allowing tolls to be imposed instantly if U.S. tariffs took effect. The law was crafted to be flexible, letting the province respond to American moves in real time. The bill was temporary, set to expire in 2027, but its message was unmistakable. BC would defend its interests and stand up for its people, even if it meant risking a trade confrontation. Targeting the Alaska route was a calculated move. These highways are Alaska's only land link to the lower 48 states, making them a critical artery for goods, fuel, and food supplies. Disrupting this corridor would hit Alaska's economy hard, especially for time-sensitive goods like fresh produce, medical supplies, and perishable items that rely on fast, reliable transport. The move was popular in BC, with many residents supporting a tough stance. But it also raised questions about logistics, the cost of enforcement, and the impact on international agreements. New toll booths and staff would be needed in remote areas, requiring significant investment and planning to ensure the system worked smoothly across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Some wondered if the tolls violated the Alaska Highway's original joint-use agreements, which were forged during World War II to guarantee free passage between the U.S. and Canada. Still, BC signaled it was ready to match U.S. pressure with its own, determined to protect its economy and sovereignty. If the U.S. inflicted economic pain, BC would return the favor, escalating the standoff and raising the stakes for both sides. The stage was set for a high-stakes showdown, with the future of cross-border trade and the livelihoods of thousands hanging in the balance. Alaska's leaders were furious, seeing BC's tolls as an attack on their state. They quickly threatened to hit back, this time targeting BC's tourism industry. Senator Dan Sullivan pushed to waive the Passenger Vessel Services Act, allowing cruise ships to bypass Canadian ports entirely. This law forces cruise ships to stop in Canada on Alaska runs, propping up BC's tourism economy. A waiver would devastate cities like Vancouver and Victoria, costing billions in lost revenue. The threat was real. Congress had done it before during the pandemic. Alaska's governor called for calm, but the cruise ship threat was now in play. President Trump backed Alaska's tough stance, escalating the economic standoff. The dispute had become a game of economic chicken, with livelihoods on both sides at risk. For Alaskans, BC's proposed tolls would hit home, especially at the grocery store. In a state where the cost of living is already among the highest in the nation, even a small increase in transportation costs can ripple through every aisle and every household budget. While most cargo arrives by sea, the 10% that comes by truck is crucial: fresh produce, urgent medical supplies, and vital oil equipment. These trucks are the lifeline for many remote communities, delivering goods that simply can't wait for the next barge or ship. New tolls would drive up transport costs, and those increases would land squarely on consumers. Every extra dollar spent at the border gets passed down the line, from trucking companies to store shelves. A carton of strawberries or a head of lettuce could suddenly cost much more. For families already stretching their budgets, these price hikes could mean making tough choices at the checkout. Alaska's oil industry, dependent on fast truck deliveries, would face higher costs and potential delays. Equipment and parts that keep the state's economic engine running could become more expensive and harder to get. The Alaska Trucking Association warned of disrupted supply chains and rising prices for essentials. Truckers say the impact would be felt not just in cities, but in rural towns where options are already limited. For a state already facing high living costs, this was a serious blow. Many Alaskans worry that their paycheck simply won't stretch far enough to cover the basics. Weekly grocery bills, construction materials, and even car repairs could all get pricier. The effects would be felt across every sector, from home improvement to healthcare. The trade dispute, born in distant capitals, was now threatening Alaskan wallets. Decisions made thousands of miles away were suddenly making life harder for ordinary people. Ordinary families would pay the price for political brinkmanship. For many, the question isn't just about tolls, it's about how to keep food on the table and their lives moving forward in uncertain times. BC's move was just the start. Canada's response was nationwide. Ontario, led by Premier Doug Ford, slapped a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., hitting states reliant on Canadian power. The Yukon Territory halted liquor purchases from U.S. companies and restricted government contracts for American firms. Yukon residents even joked about banning Donald Trump Jr. from hunting in the territory. These actions, though varied in scale, showed a united Canadian front. Provinces and territories targeted U.S. transportation, energy, and consumer goods, maximizing pressure. The trade fight had mobilized the entire Canadian Federation. As economic measures escalated, so did the rhetoric. President Trump doubled down, praising Alaska's cruise ship threat and framing the dispute as a test of American strength. BC's Premier Eby fired back, accusing Trump of wanting to annex Canada, a claim that captured Canadian anxiety. Trudeau, more measured, called the tariffs dumb, but kept diplomatic channels open, preparing retaliatory tariffs as backup. Alaska's leaders, feeling targeted, warned both Washington and Ottawa not to ignore their state's interests. Public statements on both sides hardened positions and fueled nationalistic fervor. The dispute was now a public drama, with each side convinced of its own justice. The battle lines were drawn, and compromise seemed distant. By September 2025, North America stood at a crossroads. BC's toll law was ready to go, and U.S. tariffs still loomed, both sides holding their fire, but tensions high. One path led to a full-blown trade war: tolls, tariffs, cruise ship waivers, and permanent retaliatory measures. The result would be economic pain on both sides: higher prices, lost jobs, and shuttered businesses. Another path offered hope: negotiation and de-escalation, driven by pressure from industries and consumers. The crisis exposed deep vulnerabilities in the U.S. Canada relationship, especially Alaska's dependence on Canadian goodwill. It also showed how provinces and states could shape international disputes. Whatever happens next, the events of 2025 have left a lasting mark. Even the closest partnerships can be strained to the breaking point. The future of North American trade remains uncertain.